speaker for this session is Kristen Civiletto-Morris. She's an author, adjunct law school professor, mediator, and attorney. She's focused on faith-driven action for the care of creation. Kristen is a counsel of record for a recent series of toxic injury lawsuits stemming from the historic Love Canal disaster, and has authored Green City Savior, a faith-based, environmentally themed suspense novel set in Niagara Falls. She resides in Western New York with her husband and her 4 children. Would you please welcome Kristen?
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. It is a great privilege to be here today, and I'm so excited to be talking to a group of students who are focused on issues of the day, and especially the environmental issues. I think that's fantastic. As you know, I'm Kristen Civiletto-Morris, and I thought I would tell you a little bit about my background and some of the events that came together that allow me to work in a field where I'm focused on creation care. It's not typical, I guess, to hear about an attorney who's working on anything related to creation care, but that's where I felt like God has brought a lot of my experience to bear. And really, then we're going to focus on a new subject that is really gaining steam worldwide. It's something called environmental peace building. And it's a new concept in the way that sometimes things that are new are really old and they're new again. And we'll talk about what I mean by that. But the idea is a high concept idea that has incredible practical application. So today we're going to do that. We're going to start with some of the big concepts, and then we're going to narrow down and talk about the practical application of what it means to negotiate a conflict on a regional or a world level, and how we do that on a practical level, okay, especially when it concerns the environment. So very briefly about me. 22 years ago, I went to practice in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm from Niagara Falls, New York originally. And when I went into law, I did nothing related to environmental work. I was an intellectual property litigator, and I did trade secrets and patents, that kind of work. But at the time in Atlanta, there was something new that a lot of attorneys were getting training in. And that was something called Alternative Dispute Resolution, ADR. Essentially, ADR is any resolution of a conflict outside of the court system. So you had litigators who are focused on litigating before a judge or a jury. But then outside of the court system, we had a whole new avenue and way to resolve conflict. It involved negotiation. It involved having a third person help you negotiate and come to some kind of an agreement. It involved having a third person who's not a judge or a jury actually make a decision that's binding on you as a party. So this was a new thing that had really started getting traction in Atlanta, and now, of course, across the nation. I started getting some training in ADR, and I realized it had tremendous value for all different aspects of law. No question. I was very narrow. Well, when I was 31, I was diagnosed with a cancer. And I'm still living in Atlanta at the time, and I soon noticed that lots of my classmates back home in Niagara Falls were also diagnosed with cancers. They had rare illnesses, very unusual things were creeping up. And a friend pointed out to me, we're not seeing the same thing in your Atlanta set of friends. You're at a 300-person law firm. I don't know anybody there that had cancer. Maybe they did, it was just not known. But back home, it was lots of members of my family, friends, high school classmates. I moved back to the area, and I grew a little more concerned. I started researching the environmental history of Niagara Falls. It was concerning, to say the least. I like to write, so I started to write what I was learning to process it. That's how I process information. Well, in 2011, I got a call from a family, and they said, we heard about a book you're working on and doing some research on Niagara Falls, and we live in Niagara Falls. We have a child who is severely birth defected. He had 2 club feet, he had his organs outside of his body, he had chromosomal defect, heart defects, you name it. And when this family told me that they lived only 1,000 feet from Love Canal, they didn't even know what it was. And as some of you know, it's one of the largest environmental disasters of our time in the United States. In fact, it gave rise to all of our environmental litigation, or laws at the time. But they didn't know what it was. But they realized they lived 1,000 feet from it, and as they looked into it, they became alarmed, knowing that they had this child with all of these difficulties and medical issues. Well, that family turned into 3 families. They found other families who had issues going on too. 3 families turned into 2,000 families. And about 4 years ago, we filed lawsuits on behalf of the residents of Niagara Falls. And we filed them against Niagara Falls and the major polluters and chemical companies in Niagara Falls, as well as a bunch of plumbers. Come on in, you'll see. So this suddenly is what God used to morph me into an environmental lawyer when I had no environmental experience beforehand. I had no idea that I would be transformed into this type of lawyer. But that's what happened. And I ended up putting the book on the shelf and not working on it and working on this case that basically took over our lives for the past 4.5 years. Now I'm telling you all of that for a couple reasons. Number one, I want you to see how all of the experiences of your life, your aptitudes, the things you love, the things that give you energy that you're passionate about, I think that God takes those skills and abilities and aptitudes and He develops them. And He eventually brings you to, different places in your life you never thought you would be. And so I want to encourage you, as you are in school at this point, as you are figuring out what it is you want to do, this is the kind of thing where you may not exactly know 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road, but I promise you He's using this experience right now. So what happened with me was I am engaged in this very, very stressful lawsuit, working with families, working with all the people I went to high school with. And I started to see how the application of ADR could potentially work in an environmental case. Now remember, ADR is any sort of resolution of a conflict outside of the court system. And here we had a court case that is very long, it's very expensive, it's not fast enough for people who are in an environmentally challenging situation. So is there a way that we can use that type of process, that ADR process, and get a faster resolution for people who are in the middle of an environmental conflict? Well, that is the trend that is happening now. We have an entire and growing body of negotiators, mediators, lawyers, diplomats, even heads of state, ministers of different departments within countries, who are now focused on this idea of environmental peace building. Now, again, it's a high concept, so I'm going to kind of start out with the bigger picture, and then we're going to drill down as to what this looks like, even in Niagara Falls eventually. But it's a concept that our common dependence on natural resources, and when I say that, I'm talking about clean air, clean water, on timber, on minerals, on rivers, whatever in the natural world we're living in and among, we're dependent on it. We have a common dependence on it. But we can use that as a basis for fostering peace in high conflict situations. Now again, that's a mouthful, so I'm going to put that another way. When you're talking about the natural world, it rarely respects a political boundary. Right? When you have a river, we've got people who live upriver, downriver, this side of the river, that side of the river. But something happens with the river. We have issues now that are impacting people in countries that may not like each other. All right? Even if you look at it, let's look at another example, access to water. For example, in the Middle East right now, we have the Jordan River. We have numerous countries and people groups that live on and along the Jordan River, all of whom need it for agriculture, who need it for transportation, who need it for power generation, who need it for water to drink. Now what happens when those people groups don't get along? Or when those people groups are physically preventing access to another group to get to the Jordan River? Now we have a conflict. And when you talk about natural resources, it's easy to compartmentalize and say that's an environmental issue. I think sometimes people don't realize how significant those environmental issues are to the peace in a region or the peace worldwide. Let's break it down just a little bit. When you think about economic stability of a country, what's it depend on? It depends on what? What they grow, right? What they export. You want to throw something out there? Do you have your hand up? How do they generate power? Where do they get their source of energy? Right? Those are all things relating to the economic health of a country, all related to the environmental issues, the natural resources. How is this country making money? Is it through ecotourism? Do they have sites that people want to see because they're unique and beautiful and natural wonder of the world? Absolutely tied to the economic stability of a country. What about the cultural and social stability of a country? Absolutely. The environmental issues are completely tied to that. How do you feed your people? Is this based on fishing? Is it agriculture? Again, we're tied to the soil, to the water, to the air. And when there's a disruption or a conflict along those lines, now we have countries and their well-being is threatened. You know, when a country doesn't have access to fresh water, what happens? They disintegrate, or they acquire it. And historically, they acquire it through war, by attacking, by barricading. But more and more countries are starting to look to negotiated arrangements centered on these natural resources. It is something that transcends ethnic division. It transcends a religious difference, a political difference. Because regardless of where we stand for the past 2,000 years with respect to one another, we all are codependent on these ecosystems. And the ecosystems are codependent on one another. Okay, so again, we're going to start very big picture. We have this interdependence. We have a common interest that affects the very nature and well-being of our country. You know, I didn't even mention a political stability and how the natural resources are tied to that. Boundaries, migration, population growth. Those things can only happen when there's the natural resources to support it. And when the population is exploding, these countries are going to acquire the resources in some way, right? Because otherwise we're going to have a human disaster. So when people compartmentalize the environmental issues, I want you to think broader in scope. This is a common interest that mankind has no matter where the country is, no matter where the people group lives. So those are some of the goals of environmental mediation or environmental peace building. We're looking at the things that human beings have in common. Okay? All human beings, no matter which religious background you come from, we're all charged with a moral responsibility to care for creation. And I want to get real specific on this because maybe you haven't read the Quran, for example. I want to read you some of the language because it might sound a little familiar. I think that as you do research, I'm shocked actually to see the moral imperative when it comes to the environmental issues. And I think that absolutely, we study the Bible, we study Christianity. We know, for example, that we're to be stewards over the land, that we have been given the authority, the responsibility to care for the land, right? But when you look at New Age thought, for example, there's a similar thought in terms of we're interconnected spiritually with all living things, whether it's plants, whether it's trees, whether it's Mother Earth. When you look at, for example, in the Quran, which is what I want to read to you, it says, Allah is the creator of the world. Human beings are on the world as trustees or vice regents. They're told to look after the world for Allah, for the future. It says the earth is green and beautiful, and Allah has appointed you his stewards over it. The whole earth has been created a place of worship, pure and clean. Whoever plants a tree and diligently looks after it until it matures and bears fruit is rewarded. And if a Muslim plants a tree or sows a field and humans and beasts and birds eat from it, all of it is love on his part. Our scripture, Psalm 8 says, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You've made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet, all flocks and herds and animals of the wild, the birds in the sky, the fish in the sea, all that swim in the paths of the seas. Every human being been given that kind of moral imperative to care for creation. That makes it the one thing just about on the planet that all people can ostensibly agree upon. You see the difference? We don't agree maybe religiously, we don't agree politically, we don't agree with your motives, your goals, but here's an area where as people begin to understand the perspective someone's coming from, there is an area to build agreement. And that is why mediation in this context seems to work. All right? So what I want to do is drill down real specifically now. I keep saying mediation, but I want to make sure we understand what it is. Mediation is a process. It's a negotiation, and it's an assisted negotiation. In this whole assisted negotiation, we have a neutral person who brings the parties to the table and helps them communicate. There's some characteristics of mediation that I think are very important, and it's why it works here. First of all, the neutral person doesn't make any decision whatsoever. Now you're used to a judge and a jury who might issue a ruling or a decision and everyone's got to live with it unless they appeal. Mediation's different. The parties themselves craft an agreement, and once they sign on the dotted line, it is the force of law. It is a contractual agreement. It looks like a treaty. It looks like a peace agreement. It sometimes just looks like a contract, right? The important characteristic there is that the parties themselves, though, there's an aspect of self-determination. Nobody's telling us what we have to do. We're going to come up with a result we can both live with. Right? Mediation is voluntary. No one can force the parties to a mediation to sign on the dotted line. Unless they agree, they don't need to sign. Mediation is future-oriented. When we talk about a lawsuit, what are we trying to do? We're trying to prove what happened, right? We have evidence, we have facts, we have experts talking about what happened. Mediation is different. It says, whatever your disputes are in the past, where you find yourselves now, we want to move forward. We want to have a focus on future action, future conduct, future agreement. So you can keep in your heart if you want that you are right and that you should win in a court of law. But mediation doesn't care about that. We care about what can we do that everybody will be satisfied enough to move forward. That's its future orientation. Mediation is not adversarial. This is very key. When we talk about mediation, it's a process where we are tackling problems, not people. Now, litigation is a little different. Litigation is we are suing somebody and we're adversarial to them, and we're going to go after them with everything we've got. In fact, few people who go through litigation, and if it's a divorce we're talking about, if it's a company suing another company, somebody suing their vendor, it's very difficult to come out of that circumstance in one piece. There is a financial toll that is significant. There's an emotional toll. I don't care if it's two companies battling it out, they're run by people. And the toll on people in litigation is tremendous. Well, mediation says, look, rather than beat each other up, why don't we cooperatively work and beat up this problem? And we know we have an issue that needs to be resolved. Okay, so it's got that non-adversarial mentality. I think, too, another advantage of mediation is that it's faster than litigation. We have the ability to craft an agreement, to rectify a wrong, to address a conflict, without having to go through the 10 years it takes to address an environmental issue. Now, traditionally, I told you about my case, we're 4.5 years in. It might surprise you to know that we haven't even exchanged a single piece of paper. 4.5 years. Now, what does that mean for the clients sitting in Niagara Falls in their house? They're still sitting there. And they're probably going to be for a long time, maybe another 4.5 years. The average case takes anywhere from 6 to 10 years to run its course. And that's assuming there's not an appeal event. Let's ratchet that up to a world level. We've got the Nile River with contamination issues, and we have 3 countries who are getting ready to battle it out. Well, a lawsuit will probably take 10 years. That doesn't help the people who rely on the river for fishing, for transportation, for recreation, right? Mediation allows us to go in and say, let's gather some facts. Let's make sure we know, what the issues are. Let's have a mediator that we respect, and let's get this done. Let's roll up our sleeves and get to work. That's the idea of mediation. It's faster. It's a little more efficient. Okay. Mediation in the environmental context, I think, it's such a natural relationship. When you talk about environmental issues, you're often talking about countries or people groups who are grouped together in a region. So for example, where the Jordan River flows, we have Palestine, we have Israel, we have the Jordanians, we have Syria, we have Lebanon, all of whom are impacted by the Jordan River, and then eventually the Dead Sea, where of course we also have Egypt affected. Now we have people who are antagonistic to each other, who live next to each other. Try to imagine that lawsuit, right? The idea of mediation is that we can keep relationships from getting worse. And I want to bring this more home to you so you can kind of put this in a context. Let's say your neighbor is running a hose continuously. They flooded your yard. You can't even use your yard anymore because there's a puddle this thick because you're a little more downgrading. Well, you can sue your neighbor, and a few years down the road, you may have your day in court and be able to present it before a jury. But you can also mediate with your neighbor and keep that relationship intact. The idea is, if we're going to tackle the problem and not each other, we still might like each other at the end of the day. Ratchet that up to a country level. If I have to live next to you 100 years from now, we're still going to be country side by side, and 1,000 years from now, we might still be country side by side. The idea is let's not harm our relationship further. Let's resolve conflict in a way that is protective of whatever we do have, even if it's not much. Right? So it's very well suited. I think that natural resources in the natural world are also well suited for mediation for a couple other reasons. Number one, the stakes are very, very high. Very high when you have environmental impact. Let's put this in a practical level again. We talked about how there's an impact economically, culturally, socially, politically. Well, that all goes back down to people. When the river is polluted, when the air is full of smog, now we have people who are sick. We have people who can't function at their top level. We have people who are moving, who are displaced because they need to find fresh water. People are at the heart, and living things, not just people, but it's living creatures, people, humans. We're all significantly impacted. That is why historically, when there is a dispute involving natural resources, it very quickly escalates into a high conflict. Because when you're running out of water, you don't have a lot of time. You're going to go get water. And historically, people will declare war, will blockade certain areas. There's an act of aggression. So there's such a natural tie-in with the environmental issues because the stakes are so high. I always like to think of the example with the Niagara River. Canada and the United States have had such a long relationship, and it's been kept intact largely for many, many years. But a dispute developed in the 1970s over the Niagara River because toxins were being loaded at such a great rate on the American side into the Niagara River. And it was measurable. In fact, what they do each year is they measure at the mouth of the river, at the far end of the river, and they see what's happening in between. They know, they have an accurate picture of it out. Well, in the 70s, they realized there were significant toxins coming into the river from the American side. And Canada, they came to the United States and they said, we have a problem. We need to get this worked out. Well, they fashioned an agreement that essentially has been in place for a long time. It has a monitoring component, a remediation component. In fact, one of the big polluters was Love Canal itself, was impacting the Niagara River so significantly. That was one of the ways they figured out what was happening there. But they have been able to negotiate an arrangement that has stood for decades now, and it has been very effective. They've been able to reduce the toxins, but also work cooperatively because they both need that natural resources. They need it for tourism, they need it for transportation, they need it for power generation. Think how significant that one is, right? So it's an excellent example of where natural resources have been the basis for a very peaceful relationship with Canada. Now, had we been nations with a very different culture, things might not have gone so easily. And that's what we're seeing, of course, all over the world. We're seeing areas where high conflict is developing because we have these natural resources at issue, but we also have long-standing ethnic, religious, societal differences that have been bubbling up for a long time, maybe thousands of years. The idea here is let's transcend those by focusing on something that we all have in common, and that is having a healthy environment and the access to the resources that we need. So it's a very exciting area of law. And again, I want to bring it back down to the practical. When we talk about mediation, we talked about these hallmarks of mediation, right? We talked about how it has some benefits over litigation. But now I want to talk about how do we start looking at conflict from a mediator standpoint. I think it's very helpful, and this is teaching, I hope, that really applies in all of your relationships, not just on the world level, but with your neighbor, with your significant other. Every conflict can really be boiled down to 4 components. Every conflict. Number 1, there's an issue, right? I'm gonna write these out. I'm gonna just warn you about my writing. It's terrible. So we have an issue. An issue is simply the agenda. Tuna rights, fishing licenses, contaminated river. Okay? So it sets the agenda for any discussion. Very simple. The second component to any conflict is a position. A position is simply a party's predetermined outcome. I want $5,000 because you broke my chair. You know, you fired me, I want $40,000. I want custody of our children. That's a position. How about now in the environmental context? We'd like $1.2 million in order to remediate the sewer system. Okay? So we have a position which is this pre-selected outcome. Oftentimes, when you read a newspaper article about a dispute, what you're seeing in the paper is the position. Okay? If you were at the lecture where he was talking about Tuvalu and some of the concerns that they have, one of their positions is they went to the UN and they want more developed countries to, for example, meet more stringent emissions standards. That's a position. Okay? We also have interests. I'm going to spend a little time. This is really significant. Interests are the needs and the wants of a country, an individual, a people group. And sometimes these interests are stated, and sometimes they're not. Let's say, for example, I get fired from my job. I've been there a long time, and I'm concerned that, maybe it's because I'm over a certain age. And I go to my employer. So we have an issue. I've been terminated. We have a position. I would like $40,000 in compensation for you firing me wrongfully, because I don't feel like I deserve it. Okay? So my position is at $40K. Your position is we're not giving you anything. Now, here's where the meat of the matter is, the interest. I just lost my job. What am I worried about? There's something out there.
Food.
Food. What else? Right? Money. All my necessities, my wants. How about medical? I lost my medical, right? What else? Maybe my vacation pay. I want what? A letter of recommendation, right? I need a new job. What else might I want?
Job training.
Yes. Training. I've been there a long time. I want to go somewhere else. I want to do something new. I want something. What else? When you think about interests, I want you to think psychological interests. My ego has been bruised. I need an apology. I don't feel like I was treated fairly. Right? It can be fairness. I might not want an apology, but certainly I would like some affirmation. I worked there 40 years. I would like for somebody to say, you know what, we did value you, did add something to our company. What else might be a concern? I mean, we just came up with, I don't know, 7 or 8 things just off the top of our head. I'm trying to show you what interests look like, okay? So here's the kicker. And by the way, I have a 4th thing, and that is the moral component. Was this the right thing to do? Every dispute has this. Is this the right situation? Who acted in a way that perhaps needs to be examined by that person? These 4 components, I challenge you to come up with any conflict where you can't break it down into these 4 components. Okay? Here's why it's important, especially when we're talking about environmental mediation. Traditionally, here's where negotiations started. The starting point was positional. We'd like $100,000. No, we're not giving you $100,000. I want $40,000 or my job back. We're not giving it to you. That's positional negotiation. You might be familiar with it in car accident cases. You know, the negotiations go until you wind up in the middle at some number everyone can live with. Well, positional negotiation is pretty limited. You don't have any creative options. It's really money. And when you think about it, that's kind of how our legal system is, here and across the world. How do we compensate people in the legal system? Money. Oh, your finger is worth $35,000. A broken leg is worth X amount of money. We actually have things we can look this up, and that's what it says. Right down in hand, worth $40,000. It's an average of jury verdicts. Okay? Well, there's another way to negotiate. It's called interest-based negotiation. When it's interest-based negotiation, we open up an entire world of things that we can now use as the focus of the negotiation. It is so much more creative. Instead of you win or lose at my expense, instead of it's my will over yours and I'm going to go for the most money I can to get out of you and you have to lose for me to gain, now the idea is, okay, how many of these interests, confidentiality, for example, do we have in common? And whatever common interests we have, let's start there. Natural resources, the natural world, are one of those common interests that we can always use to help negotiate conflict. All right? I want you to see this in play, in our example. Now I go to the company and I say, I know you don't want to give me $40,000, but I will take $25,000 plus a letter of recommendation, plus you pay for some college tuition for me to have additional training, and plus you let me help train my replacement because I would like to feel validated for the job I did. Company says, and by the way, I just want to throw this out there, what interest would the company have? There's always lots of interests. What would be a company interest here? Which may not be the easy.
To save money, to not have to spend
Yeah.
any money.
They don't want to pay lawyers. Lawyers are expensive, right? So we have money, just like our employee. What else? Confidentiality. What if they do have a problem? What if they are firing women or older people at a high rate and they know they're going to have a public issue? What if one of their interests is we don't want one bad apple to poison the whole well, right? These are all interests that come into play. So I go to the company and I say, look, none of us want a big public to-do. I'll take less money, I would like training, and maybe you do want that public. You helped me to get a new job because you're not against older people. Do you see how this can go both ways? Well, these interests and figuring out the interests that underlie positions, that is the heart of negotiation now. And it's, I say it's new but kind of an old thing. I want to expand on that a little bit. It's new in the environmental field in the sense that we hadn't used this kind of negotiation, interest-based negotiation, until the past 25 years. I don't know why. Before it was more attack or war or very strong positions. People held their positions. Okay? But it's new in the sense that we have better trained negotiators now. And they're focused in on these interests and how to negotiate. We have more sophisticated technology that we can offer more creative options when we are talking about environmental issues. So for example, now, we don't have access to fresh water, but we have lots of salt water. Well, now we can have a desalination plant that is much smaller, cheaper, better built. We can do that for you, little country. Okay? we're able now to have something more creative. So, interest-based negotiation, new in that sense. It's not new in another sense. We're talking here about the idea of reconciling parties. And as Christians, that's what we're about, right? We have, what does Scripture say? We have one mediator. I want to pull it up because the language is just so beautiful. And somebody's probably got it for me. Here. First of all, in Colossians, through him God reconciled everything to himself through Christ. He made peace in everything in heaven and earth by means of Christ's blood on the cross. In 1 Timothy, for there's one God and one mediator between God and mankind, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself as a ransom for all people. The idea of reconciliation is one of the ways that we reflect the character of Christ. When we're seeking to reconcile people based on the things they share in common, the things that they need to live, water, clean air, access to recreation, to parks, to trees, timber, I believe that that is one of the ways that we are walking out our faith. That is how we reflect the glory of God. And I love that this idea of reconciliation has really taken hold now across the world. We're starting to see things like peace parks be established, where the idea is a joint enjoyment of a forest that spans 3 different countries where people don't get along. But it's an area isolated where people can come and recreate and know that they're not at war. It's a wonderful idea and a wonderful concept. So, interest-based negotiation, I know this is a kind of a high-level concept, but I want you to see that it is starting now to take root. I don't know how many of you went to hear the speech by the head of the Christian church in Tuvalu. Did you guys go to that? No? Okay, good. I think it's a perfect example of interest-based negotiation. In fact, I'm going to pass this around in a second, but if we were to diagram what's going on there, let's say a conflict is brewing, and I think one is. I think they're dealing with New Zealand, Australia, maybe even Taiwan, and they want certain things. The issue is what? What's the issue right now for the island, for the island nation?
Rising sea levels.
Yeah, we have rising sea levels, exactly. Okay, the position is what? And I'm not sure how much he told you guys, but just from reading, they are going to the UN because they want certain countries, especially well-developed countries, to meet stricter emission standards. They believe that is directly tied to a rise in sea level, okay? So we'll put strict standards. They also may eventually need help because if their country disappears, they may need to be relocated, right? They might need asylum. Okay, so those are positions. They might be asking for money too. Now, let's focus in on the meaning matter, the interests. Let's just throw them out there. What are the interests of the people of the island nation of Tuvalu?
Preserving culture.
Yes. Why is that threatened, by the way? Tell me on a couple levels.
If they're not geographically in the same area, it would they become assimilated to the country instead.
Yeah, they might have to disperse and use their traditions, right? Their culture, absolutely. What else? They have a conflict brewing. What other interests are coming into play? That's a great start.
Their homes.
Their homes are disappearing. They need a place to live. Absolutely. What else? They need water. Fresh water, right? Are there any sources of fresh water on the island? Other than rainwater, no. Right? So what comes along with that? I want you to think very practically. They need proper storage, right? They need proper collection. What else? How about food? Okay. They have food security issues. They have food quality issues. They have food quantity issues. If their animals can't drink, they can't raise animals, right? Now we have a real food crisis going on. Okay, what else? Let's say they accept help. Now what? This is a country that declared its independence in 1978. What might they be concerned about with outsiders? Yeah. Independence, what else? Good. My writing is terrible. I'm just going to warn you guys. What else?
Just a typical lawyer, right?
Well, I tell my law students, and I just warned them at the beginning of the semester, they actually are appalled. They're like, we can't read anything you write. So I'm making them write. So dependence, autonomy, control, decision making. They're all things that are threatened. When you bring help on board, and by the way, they have. Taiwan, I think, has built them a building, one of their main government buildings. There's some financial assistance. But there's also the concern that outsiders can bring bad things too. Technology, cigarettes, things that aren't part of their culture, perhaps, right? We got a lot of interest working here, okay? I'm gonna pass this around because I kind of was just brainstorming and I made a list. And agricultural practices, the environmental impact of what they are doing presently. So presently they don't have sewage systems, they don't have proper infrastructure because first of all they can't dig it, right? They've got salt water coming up in the middle of the island. Now we've got environmental impact that's pretty significant. They have a population that's growing. Where are these people going to live? If they do leave, who's going to pay for that? Where are they going to live? Will they be able to keep their culture together, like you were talking about, wherever they do go? Will they be granted asylum? Where will they be citizens of what country? See, these are all tied to the environmental issues. You can pass these around the way. If I don't have enough, I'll email copies of them. As a negotiator, this is where we would start. We wouldn't be looking at the position being just lower your, or increase your search standards. Because first of all, that's not going to be fast enough to help the people of this island nation, right? As a negotiator now, we're going to focus on these interests. We're going to start thinking in terms of how do we affirm these people? How do we work with these people? Because guess what? Australia has interests too, right? They don't want the face of their nation to start changing perhaps, like is happening in other countries. They might want to keep this people group in a particular area of Australia for ease of taking care of them. Australia has a PR issue. Won't they look mean if they're the ones who refuse to allow people whose entire land is disappearing to come and live there? Right? There's all kinds of interests now that they will have as well. The idea behind environmental peacemaking is we're going to start here because we can all agree that environmental issues are impacting every single aspect of us. Okay? If we start there, we know that when countries, when people are involved in that peace building process, it's a sustainable peace. That's the one great thing about mediation. When you're involved and you're bought in to the resolution, it tends to stick. You know, it's very hard to show up to a mediation in bad faith because sooner or later your colors show, true colors show. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't happen. People sign treaties all the time where their motives are wrong. They have ulterior motives, right? Exactly. But here's the thing. People then learn that about you. And some countries and people groups care about their reputation. So that's an interest that they have, is in looking like they do what they say they're going to do. See? Here's the idea, and I'm going to wrap up with this because I know you have some questions. I hope you do. I see conflict as an opportunity, especially in the environmental context. It's a way to get at more creative solutions. It's a way to get to the root issues sometimes that are driving changes in the nation, like climate change, and getting to the root issues of why it's happening. Bless you. Two is, for example, shine a light on climate issues. Now, they might not get a resolution in time, but what have they done? They have shown through conflict and through the concerns they have that there is a deeper issue to be addressed. Okay? I think this is also an opportunity to work towards lasting, sustainable solutions for people who historically have not gotten along. It's a wonderful way of affirming people and being hard on the problem, easy on people, and allowing them to flourish and to grow. So I wanted to throw this out there. Any questions at all about this idea of environmental mediation and peacemaking building, or anything even about my background or experience? I would love to answer. So bring on your questions. Go ahead.
So how would this idea of mediation play out in a situation where there's a power dynamic where one group has radically more than another? So thinking about like a large multinational corporation and then a group of average citizens.
Yes, that's a very excellent question. First of all, let's use the island nation of Tuvalu as an example, okay? Do they have a serious voice, and are they being heard on a worldwide level? Probably not. But what they are doing is enlisting people to come alongside of them who also share a common interest with them. So there's other island nations, for example, that are having the same issue. Who's not impacted by a rise in sea level? What they do is they build consensus and bring that to the negotiation table. I think also the fact that we have an interconnected system with the internet, with 24-hour news, that is a massive leveling of the playing field. Because now how a country is perceived by others is suddenly much more important than it was in the past. There is such a perception of power that might be different from actual power, and because of the world that we live in, that's something that can be leveraged, and we see that happening. Who ever heard of Tuvalu before, climate change started impacting them, right? Did you guys know about it before you learned about it? No? I mean, a couple of you probably did, you're shaking your head. But the point is that we now have a different world where your voice can be heard, and when you have a skilled negotiator, they can help level that playing field too. One of the jobs of a negotiator is to help the parties communicate, but also to work on those power imbalances. So for example, a negotiator in a domestic situation, when they perceive that there's a serious power imbalance, sometimes they take a step back and they start addressing the root issues. It's not just about custody now, it's about power. I'm going to give you an example because I want you to see how this works out. You'll often hear a custody dispute. I want custody. And the father says, I want custody. Sometimes they don't want custody. What they really want is a say-so. But they say custody because what? That's their position. But the real interest is, I want to be able to say who my child's doctor is, where they live, what school they go to. As you probe and you get a little deeper into the concerns and the interests underlying these issues, that's how you are able to address some of those power imbalances. Because they're very surface level sometimes, and as we dig down, we see what's driving them. A good mediator can do that. So it's a great question. Go ahead.
But doesn't a good mediator have to, or a negotiator in a sense, what does they do they bring to the table? That's, a negotiator has to bring something to the table, and what does Tuvalu bring? That's the question.
Yes. Are you talking in terms of skills of the
Yeah, no, I
representative
mean,
or
like
their
resources
interests?
and like interests. You can't just come to the table without providing any benefits and just complaining.
Yes. Okay, that's a great question. When we start thinking about these interests that we can now bank upon, this is where creativity is so important. Because here's an example. They have tuna fishing areas that are of great value to people around them. They control, because of international boundary law, who can fish, for example, in certain areas. There's a great negotiating point. I don't know if he had mentioned this, but their internet suffix, TV, is a valuable commodity. Think about that. Instead of .com, .tv, that is their internet suffix. That's like a blessing from above. They can license that out all over the world. They do. They have products that are unique to the area because of the makeup of their water that taste different. That's a unique aspect that they're able to leverage. Plus the novelty of having an island nation of that size. Some people like to visit it just because of that. They might have biodiversity that is not present elsewhere. I think it's a good negotiator, not just the mediator, but the person representing. That's where you got to do your homework and preparation. I think a big part of negotiation takes place before you step foot in the negotiation room. You're doing your homework on the other side. You're doing your homework at their interests. You're thinking about your interests. And you're doing it in a way you can articulate when you're under pressure. That makes sense? Good question. Go ahead.
So
Make sure we're good on
with your book now, saying what, like, how are you resolving that mediation?
Well,
Like specifically.
back to mediation. We know a very large case involving banana farmers in a South American country is in the process of going to mediation, and it's a big one. We think that's going to set a good pattern for us. And so I don't know that we're heading that way. We are certainly going to explore that. And right now it's a little early. We haven't exchanged any paperwork yet. Once we do and we feel very confident about what we're going to see from the other side, we will explore mediation. I'll tell you why. We're going to be made to, because every court now, just about in the United States, is starting to require you to explore mediation. And they should. I think lawyers who don't recommend it to their client, they're bordering on malpractice. We always have plan A. We litigate, we're tough advocates for our client, but we're also looking at business resolutions or interest-based negotiation to resolve for our client. Their business isn't litigating, ours is. All right. Good. I know we're over our time, so if anyone has any questions, come and see me. I have some business cards here. I love talking to students about their choices or what they're thinking about going into. Email me. All right. Thank you again.